So Michael and I met in college, and we grew up in pretty similar household environments, but very, very different contexts. Michael was and still is very much a city boy, and I'm a little bit more of a country girl. And so I will never forget, nor will I let him forget, the first time that I took him home to meet my family. One weekend, we headed out to my grandparents' farm because this is where all of my family would gather. My mom and my brother would be there, my aunts, uncles, and cousins would be there. Everyone gathered at the farm to celebrate anything, for whatever reason. And one of the granddaughters bringing home the new boyfriend certainly fit the bill. So we head out to my tiny town of 600 people. Yeah, there's like twice that many in this room, okay? And we go down the dirt road, and we get to the farm, and when we get there, I make some like general introductions, and then I just kind of get to work. I just fall into habit. And so I take Michael with me, and we go out to the pasture, and we gather the eggs from the hen house, and then we go out back, and we get some beans and some greens for dinner that night, and then we go down to the barn, and we greet the horses and the cows and the pigs and the one donkey that we had at the time, and I might have mucked out a stall real quick. If you know, you know. And then we get to supper that night, and it's loud and chaotic. There are people eating inside. There are people eating outside. Kids are running in and out with the screen doors slamming behind them. Man, I loved the sound of that screen door. Like I can still hear it, you know? That screen door meant that I was home. And when you're home, it's a party. And so I was loving every minute of being there. What I didn't realize is that Michael wasn't exactly loving every minute of it. He wasn't hating it, but he was feeling pretty overwhelmed. And so a couple days later, it's the end of the weekend, we're heading back to college, and I finally get to ask him the question I've been waiting to ask all weekend. Well, what'd you think? And Michael just kind of stared straight ahead and said, followed by, and I quote, I just didn't know people lived like that. So I thought to myself, okay, I need to be gracious right now. Like, I have a really big family, and I know how overwhelming they can be. I have like 30 plus first cousins. It's like my big fat Greek wedding, only the hillbilly edition, all right? That's my family, and I know this. So I just graciously said, well, what do you mean? And he said something along the lines of, well, there's just like a lot of dirt. And I feel like everything we ate was deep fried. And also everything we ate came from your barn or your yard. It was just a lot. I've never been on a farm, and it felt like a movie. Like, if you want to eat tonight, you got to go out there and catch your own dinner, you know? And at that point in the conversation, I just kind of wanted to spit my tobacco right there on his shiny white Nike Airs. But I didn't. I didn't do that. I just took a deep breath, and I leaned into the conversation, and I just tried to figure out what it was he really trying to say. And what I discovered is that Michael wasn't grossed out by farm life. Not totally. He was actually very appreciative of it. He was in awe, really. And in that moment, I had just caught him trying to process just how differently we had been raised. Now, at this point in our relationship, we knew about some of our differences. I mean, we knew he was more introverted, I was more extroverted. He prefers the beach, I like the mountains. He was raised in the hood, and I was raised on the farm. We knew that. But now it was really starting to sink in. Michael is a whole lot of Tupac. And I'm a little Shania Twain. Yeah. He worked at the car wash in the summer, and I hauled hay. I drank my milk straight from the cow, and homeboy over here is lactose intolerant. Okay? I'm not kidding. So Michael was just realizing in that moment, and I knew it too, if we really loved each other, we were going to have to work very hard at understanding each other. Now, we are 18 years into our marriage. Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, and sometimes, guys, an old farm saying will still kind of come out of me, out of nowhere. And he'll look at me like I'm speaking a different language, but instead of just walking on by, assuming that there's no way he can understand what I'm talking about, he stops, he has a little fun with it, but he tries to decipher what I'm saying because he wants to understand. And guys, that's the kind of work that we're going to have to put in tonight to understand what Jesus is talking about in John chapter 10. So if you've got your Bibles with you, would you go ahead and open those up? Now, chances are, if you have ever read anything from any of the Gospels, that's Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, you have probably come across a parable or a metaphor or an analogy that Jesus used for teaching, and you've probably had a moment of confusion like this. I mean, one minute Jesus is talking about seeds over here, and the next minute he's talking about fish over there, and now, oh look, he's talking about sheep again. And if you're a city kid, good luck, right? But even if you are a country kid, we're talking about farming 2,000 years ago. And so before we just decide, we get the general gist, or we decide we never will, let's lean in. Let's lean into this conversation about a shepherd and his sheep, and let's just see if we can figure out what Jesus is trying to tell us tonight. Well, we're going to read our passage again. This time we're going to start in verse 1. So I'm going to ask you, would you stand for the reading of Scripture? John chapter 10, starting in verse 1. It says this: "Very truly I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out. And when he has brought out all of his own, he goes ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they don't recognize a stranger's voice." Now, Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. See, they didn't get it either. So you're all right. Verse 7. "Therefore, Jesus said again, very truly, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy, but I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Now the hired hand is not the shepherd, and he doesn't own the sheep. And so when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and he runs away. And then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. And that man runs away because he's a hired hand. He doesn't care anything for the sheep." Verse 14. "I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And I have other sheep that are not of this pen, and I must bring them in also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life only to take it up again. No one takes it from me. I lay it down of my own accord. And I have the authority to lay it down, and I have the authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father." You can be seated. Now, here's the deal. A lot of times when we hear sermons or lessons from Scripture like this one, a lot of times they are about the sheep and how dumb sheep are. Have you heard these before? Yeah, they're not wrong either. I mean, just a basic Google search will show you that sheep habitually fall off the side of cliffs if their shepherd doesn't stop them. Sheep. Hold on. I feel like there's sheep in the room with us right now. That was wild. Okay, sheep also will go into a pasture and they will literally devour everything until there's nothing left. And they're too dumb to figure out how to get into a different pasture without being led there. And so they'll literally just eat everything in their path. Do you know where this is going? Including their own poop. Yeah. I mean, dumb, right? So dumb. And this is why when I hear sermons like that, comparing us as the followers of Jesus to sheep, I'm a little bit offended. But then I see videos like this one. There it is. Yeah. gets me every time. Yeah, I'm offended, and then I'm like, oh, yeah, that's relatable, right? So talking about the sheep, that's a legit way to go. But honestly, guys, that's not what John wants to talk about in this text. He doesn't really focus on the sheep. John is highlighting the shepherd. And so the question for us tonight is, what do we learn about the good shepherd from John chapter 10? And I think one of the best ways to capture important truths about our good shepherd is to look at him in contrast to the other characters that are mentioned. And so one of the first things that stands out to me is this: the good shepherd provides for his sheep. But the hired hands, they're just there for their own provision. If I go back to verses like 3 and 4, I see things like the sheep follow their shepherd because he calls them by name and they know his voice. There is a relationship of love and trust and care there. If I go on to verse 9, I see that the good shepherd leads them in and out of the fold and they find pasture. And all of these verses and all of these attributes, they remind me of Psalm 23. Now, if you've spent any time in the church or you come from a faith family, chances are you've probably heard Psalm 23 or maybe you've seen it somewhere in your house. I know that growing up, my great-grandmother had Psalm 23 on a decorative plate in her china cabinet. Anybody else's grandma have decorative plates? What was with that decor trend, right? Like, I don't know. My mom has a clock in her dining room, a big wooden clock, and she has the first verse of Psalm 23 engraved in that clock. Now, why do followers of Jesus love this psalm so much? Because it proves how much the Good Shepherd cares for his sheep. Psalm 23 says that he leads us into beautiful meadows so that we can find the rest that we need. It says that he takes us to quiet waters so that we can drink and be refreshed. Psalm 23 says that he leads us to the right path, the secure path, the correct path. And even when we, as sheep, decide to go down a different path and we end up in darkness and trials, he calls this the valley. You know where he is? Right there with us to comfort us. The Good Shepherd really is our provider. But then there's this contrast. There are these hired hands in the story. Now, hired hands are not the shepherd, but they look a lot like the shepherd. And hired hands try to lead the sheep down certain paths also, and they have just enough knowledge that, like, they look like they can be trusted. But the thing is they don't really care anything about the sheep. They're just there to get paid. Now, in this particular context where Jesus is saying these things, he is talking about the Pharisees who were standing right there. Jesus is saying that these teachers of the law, the only thing they care about is getting all of the religious folk to follow them. They want all of the religious folk to care more about upholding the letter of the law than actually care about taking care of each other. So they don't actually know their followers. They don't know their names. The only thing they care about is if they check all the right boxes. They're the hired hands. They look the part, but they're essentially strangers. But what about in our context? Now, the Pharisees were pretty influential in their day, but I can't help but think about the influencers in our own. I'm thinking about people in your schools, people on your teams, maybe people on your socials. Those who have enough knowledge about a particular subject that it's caught your attention, and now they're trying to secure your allegiance. And you know how they're doing that? They're telling you that they know you, that they see you, that they get you, that they can envision a future for you that you've never even thought about. But guess what? They don't know anything about you. They don't know your name. To them, you are nothing more than a number as they watch the list of their followers grow. Where your good shepherd cares about you, mind, body, and soul, and knows exactly what you need, these false influencers are only interested in how you can meet theirs. Now, here's the problem, though. Sometimes it's really hard to decipher who is in a relationship for you and who's just in it for selfish motives. And the truth is, some of you may be sitting there right now thinking, yeah, I don't even really know if I can trust Jesus to be as good as he says he is. And you know what? I get that. And that's okay. That is totally fine. In fact, let me just give you this tidbit. You can always bring your questions and your doubts and your fears and your insecurities to the Good Shepherd. You are not going to scare him away. You are not going to make him angry. In fact, he will walk with you through your insecurities. But you go ahead and try to bring your questions and your doubts to those false influencers. And don't be surprised when they get defensive and angry, and don't be shocked when they completely ghost you. Because the truth does not mind being questioned, but a lie refuses to be challenged. Try it. So we can rest in the promise that the Good Shepherd provides for his sheep, but what else do we see in this passage? Well, I think another one that pops out to me is that the Good Shepherd protects his sheep. But again, the hired hand seeks his own protection. Look back at verses 12 through 15 again. Jesus says that the hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. And so when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and he runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. This man runs away because he's a hired hand and he doesn't care for the sheep. But I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep know me, and I lay my life down for my sheep. Okay, so maybe when you think of attributes of a shepherd, you don't automatically think of like big, mighty warrior protector. Like fighting off wolves, really? And I get that because you know why? We read the same children's Bible, and I saw the pictures too. All those pictures in Sunday school of shepherds, they just looked so unassuming and lonely, a little bit strange. Like even Jesus, the pictures of Jesus when he was holding sheep, I mean, sure, he looked gentle and kind, but also kind of weak, if I'm honest. Like not exactly the picture I get when I think of a mighty rescuer. But you know what? That's not how Scripture tells it. In fact, in the Old Testament, the analogy of a shepherd was used oftentimes in talking about the role of a king. Some of you might remember that the shepherd boy David became king. There's a connection there. Maybe you've seen pictures like this one of David. This is what I'm talking about. Like there's little David sitting out in the field with his sheep, singing songs and strumming on his harp, right? And this is actually true. David did write a lot of these psalms, like Psalm 23 that I was just talking about a little bit ago. And he did write those songs while he was watching over his sheep. But I think it's pictures like that one that has given us this image of weak shepherds. But let me tell you one of my favorite contrasts in the Old Testament. It's a contrast between Saul, who was the first king of Israel, and David, who followed him as king. The first time that we meet Saul, he is actually out searching for his father's herd because they're lost and he can't find them. But the first time that we meet David, he is tending his father's flock. He is caring for them, and he is fighting off lions and bears with his bare hands. There ain't nothing weak about that. And don't forget, it is when David is a shepherd boy that he actually fights and defeats and kills the giant Goliath. How about that? Oh, yeah. That one hits a little different, doesn't it? It's like, oh, how it started and how it's going. Yeah, that's solid progression right there. So in John chapter 10, Jesus is certainly not saying, I'm weak, I'm lonely, I'm awkward, kind of a pansy. No, that is not what he's saying. What he's saying is this: I, the good shepherd, provide everything my sheep need, including protection from wolves, lions, bears, maybe even from themselves. In Luke chapter 15, Jesus is defending his habit of eating with sinners, and he tells this parable. He says, imagine that you have 100 sheep, and one evening you're counting them up and you realize that one is missing. One. He says, would you not leave the 99 in open country and go find that lost sheep? Now, that sheep probably got distracted by something that it thought was more interesting, something that it thought was better, or maybe it is in the clutches of a predator. But whatever the reason, that shepherd goes, searches day and night, traversing desert and cliff, ready to fight off anyone or anything in order to bring that sheep home to safety. And he does it joyfully. You guys have heard the song. There's no shadow he won't light up, no mountain he won't climb up coming after me. There's no wall he won't kick down, no lie he won't tear down, coming after me. It's because the Good Shepherd pursues his sheep, sometimes to his own personal detriment. But the hired hands, they peace out at the first sign of discomfort. So I challenge you to test the loyalty of those you follow. Because if they don't love you like that, you might be walking in the wrong shadow. And guys, the protection doesn't end there either. Because the third and most incredible aspect of our Good Shepherd that we see in this passage is this. The Good Shepherd pays for his sheep with his life. But the thief steals the sheep to implement their death. In verse 7, Jesus said, "Very truly, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever comes through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy, but I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." Now, at first glance here, it kind of looks like Jesus is switching metaphors on us. Like first he's a shepherd, now he's the gate. What's going on here, right? But here's what you have to understand about shepherding in ancient Israel. Sometimes they would have their sheep out grazing in a pasture and night would begin to fall. And they had to do whatever they could in the moment to protect their sheep. So sometimes they would usher them up against a rock formation or maybe up against a line of bushes. And then they would find limbs and rocks to come and make sides around the pen. But there wasn't anything really available for a makeshift door. And so the shepherd himself would become the gate. He would literally lie down in the entrance of the pen, and each of the sheep would come to the shepherd as they came in for the night, and he would say their name. They would hear his voice, and they would come in knowing that they were safe. Now, during the night, a lot of times thieves and robbers would come, and they would try to get in over the sides of the rocks or limbs. Sometimes they would shear the wool in order to sell it. Sometimes they would kill the sheep outright. But if a thief was dumb enough to come to the door when the real shepherd was standing guard, good luck, brother. If you think you're going to get in there, you're going to have to go through the shepherd first, because him standing there as that door means that inside this door is life, and outside this door is the assurance of death. And speaking of death, a little bit later on in this passage, Jesus says that the shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. But you and I both know that this doesn't mean physically laying down. This means death, his death. And there are some that will tell you that this is the shepherd being defeated. There are some who will say he lost, the thief won. The thief not only stole the lives of the sheep, he took down the shepherd too. But that's not how this story goes. No, Jesus says in verse 17, the reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life only to take it up again. No one takes it from me. I lay it down of my own accord. And just a few chapters later in the Gospel of John, chapters 18 and 19, we see this all play out. Jesus is arrested. Jesus is beaten. Jesus is crucified. And some of his followers stay with him through that, but some of them run away and hide. Others of his followers deny that they even know him. But do you know what they all did? They all wept. They wept because they thought it was over. But see, we have the gift of knowing something they didn't know. It wasn't over. It was just getting started. Because the thief did not take the shepherd's life. The shepherd gave his life willingly, and he laid his life down only to take it back up again 3 days later. This is good news. This is great news. Our shepherd is victorious, and that changes everything for us. But I do want you to understand something. This doesn't mean that the thief is done thieving. Oh no, he's still out there, lurking around in the shadows, calling out your name. He's trying to get you to walk down the path of addiction. He's trying to get you to question your sexuality. He is causing you to doubt everything you've ever been told is true. He is lurking around every corner, working his angle to continue to steal and kill and destroy. In fact, the disciple Peter warned Christians about this in 1 Peter chapter 5. He said, "Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, waiting for someone to devour." Yes, this lion, this enemy in 1 Peter chapter 5 is real. And Peter says you got to keep your head on a swivel. You got to be ready, and you have to know the good shepherd's voice. It's the only way that you can get away from the devil's schemes and temptations. But here's what John tells us in Revelation chapter 5. There's another lion. John says, "Do not weep, do not mourn. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has triumphed over all." And so what does this mean for us? This means that every single day is going to be a battle. We are going to have to fight to hear the voice of our shepherd. But the ultimate war has already been won. And the good news of the gospel is that we can walk in freedom. And so what do we learn about our good shepherd from John chapter 10? We learn that he provides for us, yes, and he protects us, absolutely, but even more valuable than any of these physical gifts is this: all other paths advertise life, but will lead to your death. Jesus died in your place so that you can truly live. Your good shepherd, Jesus Christ, is inviting you tonight to not just believe that that's true, but to act on it. He's inviting you to walk through the door, to meet him at the entrance of the pen and let him call you by name. Let him call you his. Now listen, I know that there are some of you who are going to want to avoid walking through that door, and there's a lot of reasons for this. Some of you are going to want to avoid that door because you think this isn't for you. Some of you are sitting there right now thinking, I know what this is. This is gospel night. This is the night for sinners. But that's not me. I'm already saved. Now, I do hope that Sean is paying attention. And I do hope that Nicole is listening, because we all know what they were doing in the back of the bus on the way here. But this isn't for me. It's not for me. I'm already saved. In fact, you could say that I'm righteous. So no gospel needed here. Thank you, though. Okay, if this is you, in any way, shape, or form, first of all, hear me say this: no judgment. I've been there. But second, hear me say this: you don't actually understand the gospel. See, comparative righteousness, this idea that if I'm doing better than they are, then I'm probably good, that's not actually righteousness. In fact, the Apostle Paul tells us in Romans 3, quoting from Psalm 14 and 53, he says, no one is righteous, not even one. And the prophet Isaiah tells us in Isaiah 64 that every single one of us have become like one who is unclean, and all of our righteous acts are like filthy rags. So it's time that every single one in this room recognizes that you are a sinner in need of a Savior. And the good news of the gospel is you have one. And so if you've been standing in the circle of shame, it's time to put down your rock, sister. It's time to recognize that you too need justification, brother, and line up at the door, because this invitation is for you. So come on home. Now, others of you, Others of you are going to want to avoid this door for very different reasons. Some of you have walked through this door before, but for whatever reason, you turned around and you walked right back out. And you have been walking down a number of other paths, some that have led to your destruction. And so you're assuming that the invitation is no longer for you. Others of you are going to want to avoid the door because it's all you've ever done. You've walked so far and so long in the other direction, and the sins that you've committed are so heavy and so dark, you think there is no way that he could ever carry or erase them. Now, if either of those sound like your story, I want to take you back to Luke 15. But this time, not the story of the lost sheep, the lost son. If you're not familiar with this story, it's about a boy who asked his father to give him his inheritance early. He wanted everything that he would get after his father passed away, but he wanted it now. And so his father gave him the money, and the boy went into the city and he squandered it. He spent it all, everything that his father had saved and worked for years and years, all for the purpose of giving his son a gift that would bring him comfort and security and peace. He spent it all. He ate lavish meals. He drank to excess. He probably enjoyed the company of a female companion or two. And when he finally ran out of money, he had no choice but to face his own depravity. And the text tells us that he was so broke and he was so hungry that he took a job feeding pigs on a farm, and he longed to eat from the slop that he was serving the swine. Now, it's at this point in the story that you might have heard that this boy had a full breakdown, that he recognized the error of his ways, that he repented of his sin, that he begged for his father's forgiveness. But that's not actually what the text says. Actually, Luke 15, verse 17 says, when he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I'm going to set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son, so make me like one of your hired servants.' And so he got up and went to his father." See, the boy didn't go home because he was sorry. He went home because he was starving. The only thing that he was sorry about is that his funding had run out and his fun had come to an end. But you know what? I'll give him this. At least he recognized this one truth. The path that led him to the world was going to kill him. But the door to his home led to life. And so he went home. And he started into his speech, his interview to become a servant. But when he got to the part where he said, "I'm no longer worthy to be called your son," his father said, "I'm going to go ahead and stop you right there. There is nothing you could ever do. There is nowhere you could ever go that would change the way I feel about you. I am for you, my child, and I will be for you forever." And the father put his arm around his son, and he led him into the house, the screen door slamming behind them. And they had a party because he was home. Now, we don't get to know the rest of this boy's story. We don't know whether he ever properly repented of his sin or not. I like to think so. I mean, how could he not? This boy, like so many of you, have this assumption that you've made this mess, so now you have to lie in it. Like the woman in John chapter 8 caught in adultery, there's this assumption that there's going to have to be a punishment for the sin, some kind of condemnation, or at least approving of oneself before the invitation to the door would even be open to you. But you know what? They have it backwards, and so do you. I make no mistake, transformation is coming. But transformation comes after invitation. And tonight, Jesus is just simply inviting you to walk through the door. He wants you to come in, whether you came in before and you turned around and walked back out, or whether you've never even given the door a second look. Come in and find provision. Come in and find protection. Come in and find full and abundant life. And you know what? After a while, you will find that you desire change. You'll find that you desire growth. You will find that you are transformed from the inside out. Because for the first time in your life, for some of you, the only time in your life, you will find out what it's like to have someone be for you. And you'll have no other response than to be for him right back. Because you're going to learn. All other paths advertise life, but they lead to your death. Jesus is the only one who has died in your place so that you can truly live. You have been justified fully by his grace, and now you have the freedom to walk. So would you choose to walk through the door? And just allow him to continue to prove his love for you. Because Jesus is for you, child. And he will be for you forever. So why don't you come on home? You don't want to miss the party.